Welcome everyone to how to connect to any REST API with no code. Today I am joined by our three lovely presenters. I'll hand things over to Tandra to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Tandra Jarretts. I am a FME Flow technical support specialist, and I'm really excited that I'm presenting this webinar because I've learned a lot about our REST API, and I'm excited to share that with you.
I'll go next. I'm Evie, and I am a FME Forum technical support specialist. I work a lot with APIs and connecting to different web services, so I'm excited to show that off. I'll hand it off to Bailey.
Hi everyone, I'm Bailey. I do the same thing as Tandra and Evie here at Safe on the Flow team. And yeah, excited to be here today.
Awesome. And Tandra, is this your first webinar with us?
First time presenting, yes.
Awesome. So special shout out to Tandra. Thanks for coming on air today. And I'll also note that we have Sinai on the back end helping us with the questions panel. So if you have any questions during the webinar at all, please do drop those into the questions tab on the bottom right. And you can also keep letting us know where you're tuning in from in the chat. We have a poll coming up, so keep an eye on that polls tab. And then lastly, I'll note the help button on the bottom left. So if you have any audio issues or video issues throughout, just click that button for 4 simple steps to take. And if you do wish to download the slides to follow along live, you can do so with that button on the top right of the PDF. Okay, with that, I will get our presenters to turn off their webcams to save on some bandwidth for the remainder. And I'll hand it off to the team to go over our agenda here.
Yeah, so I'll go over the agenda. First, we'll go over what is a REST API and using APIs in FME. Then we'll go through some authentication, the new Open API caller, and FME Flow REST API workflow. And then we'll do some Q&A and wrap up. So first poll, how familiar are you with working with APIs? So if you go to the polls tab, you can vote.
Yeah, I'll just publish that now. Yeah, this will be good to know as we go through the content today where everyone's level is at.
Yeah, it looks like most people are not very experienced or somewhat familiar.
All right, looks like we've got most votes now. Yeah, somewhat familiar and just starting out, pretty well split for the majority, and then about 14% very experienced. I'm sure there'll be a lot of knowledge and takeaways for, yeah, no matter what your level is today.
Awesome. Yeah, so moving on, I'll go into a little bit of an introduction of APIs and FME. So first, what is an API? It's an application programming interface. That's what it stands for. And it gives you a way to connect to a server, an application from a client. And in this case, we'll be using FME. So APIs can be used to request specific data, update records, or even delete records programmatically. Why would you use an API? Users often want to access APIs so that they can automate a manual process, fetch the most up-to-date data, send data to the web, integrate applications, connect systems, and many more. Have you ever wanted to download a report from an online service, but were tired of manually logging in and fetching the same data over and over again? So this is one of the benefits here. So I'll go over some important API terminology. So the REST is a common type of API with uniform structure, uses a URL to call a resource. The HTTP method determines the action you are using. It's also sometimes called the verb. This is sometimes it's most commonly get, post, delete, or any of those. The request headers gives context to the call of what data type is being sent. Request body specifies the information to be modified, created, or deleted, and is only available for certain methods. The request URL is the URL address that allows access to the API and all of its features. It's also sometimes called the endpoint. And the query string provides attributes to query the call and is included at the end of the request URL. And then we also have the Open API specification that we'll talk about, which is a standardized document of what endpoints are available and what variables the API expects to receive. So here's an example of some API documentation. The documentation should tell you everything you need to know for your call. And sometimes they even give you a place to try out your call and just so you know what you're expecting to receive. So here are some benefits of REST APIs. So you can automatically send data to a web service, create reports using the most up-to-date data possible, and integrate multiple data sets for multiple services. But how would you access APIs without any code? Usually people access them with programming languages like Python, but you can do this without it coding with third-party tools. One third-party tool that we will be discussing is FME. However, the basics of accessing APIs will be the same no matter what tool you use. So to go over FME briefly, FME is an enterprise integration platform. It has two main products, FME Form, where you author your workflows, and FME Flow, where you can automate those workflows. And we'll go over this in some of our demos as well. So FME started with spatial data, but now we have support for all data support. So this is a little bit of our history of how we go through our support for all of the different data integrations. So in FME, we also have some built-in options. We call them transformers, where you can connect directly to your service, whether it be in a reader or writer, or a transformer such as the Autodesk Docs connector, where there's a package and you can connect with a web connection. We will also be going over the powerful API transformers, where you can customize your own call directly. So the creator is the one that will initiate your workspace, and then the HTTP caller is where the call to the REST API is handled. This is where we will configure everything. And the JSON fragmenter is important for parsing that JSON and making it so that it's digestible for the rest of the workspace. So automating your API-driven workflows, what if you wanted to run this more frequently and avoid the manual effort? You can use FME Flow on a schedule or triggered by something in the backend. You can make it run in response to events in real time and create apps to run jobs on demand. So with that, I'll pass this off to Bailey to show us our first demo.
Thank you, Evie. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a traffic data demo where my goal is to automatically receive up-to-date traffic data tailored to my commute home from the office. But this is usually blocked by a lot of unnecessary information that I get from looking up the traffic data online. And it's time consuming to sort through all of that and determine what is only relevant to my commute. So the key here is I'm going to use FME to get the data directly from the Drive BC API, and then I'm going to automate it on a schedule to then send myself a custom HTML report with the data for my commute home at a set time each day. So let's jump into the demo. So first of all, you're going to want to look up the documentation. I want this URL as my request URL, so I'm just going to copy it and then jump back over to Workbench. So I'm going to add a creator to the workspace and follow that with our HTTP caller. So if I connect these up and open this up, I'm going to paste in that URL I copied, and I'm going to select the get method because I'm only getting information here. I don't need to change anything else right here, so I'm going to click OK. So now if we run this and look at the output, we see our JSON response body. So we have all this information here, but the key is how do I work with it and parse out what I need. So I'm going to add a JSON fragmenter and connect those up. And I'm going to use the response body as the JSON attribute, and I'm going to leave it like that for now and just run it to see what we get. And so you'll see down here we have the 3 indices, but I only want this events information and this response. So I'm going to go back into the transformer and change this query. And I'm going to put in events here. And I'm going to leave the wildcard at the end because I want all the events data. I'll change these to yes and this to no, and I'm good to go. And so now if we run it, I see there's 50 fragments output, but we don't see them in the visual preview, and we only see them over here in the feature information, and that's because our attributes aren't exposed yet. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to expose some attributes. So today I want to expose headline, geography, and description. So I'm going to type these in here. There we go. And so now let's run it again. And there we can see the attributes in our visual preview. So next I'm going to add a geometry replacer, and I'm going to use that geography attribute, and I'm going to get the GeoJSON from it to create my points. There we go. And then I'm going to use a coordinate system setter. Oh, it's all good. There we go. And now I'll run it. So now looking at our visual preview down here, I'm going to just make this a bit bigger for you. We can see all our data that's showing up in the province of BC. So now I'm just going to paste in an HTML report generator and an HTML writer that I've already pre-configured for today. And I'm just going to connect those up, and I'm going to jump back to the HTTP caller, and I'm going to alter our request URL. I'm going to paste in this URL, and all I'm doing is adding a bounding box to the city of Vancouver because I don't need data for the entire province. I only need it for Vancouver because that's where I live today. And so now we can see we're going to have a map and a table with those attributes that I've exposed in that HTML report. So that's good, and I can write it all out. So now that's done running. I'm going to open that. Open in another window. I just got to pull it over. And there we go. So now we can see we've got our interactive map where we can move it around and click on features and get what event they are. And we also have our table that contains all our information. So now I'm going to jump back to Workbench, and I'm going to paste in a bookmark here. And I've got a map here, and it's just a map of GeoJSON on my commute. I'm going to buffer it to 10 feet today. Yeah, that works good. Just to make sure I get all the data. The clipper, I don't need to alter anything here, so that's good. And we're just going to take our original data and clip it to that commute buffer area. And now we can see I've got 2 traffic events that are along my commute. And if I open up the map again here, pan to it, I can see that my events are actually construction on this bridge here. So now I just got to alter our flow, and I'm only gonna send those 2 events into the HTML report. And now I'm going to publish it up to FME Flow. So we'll go here. I need to change the name. And I'm going to upload data files because I need that commute map with it. And I'm going to use the data streaming service as well today, so that's good. And now if I click this link, it's going to open the Run Workspace page in Flow right here. So now I'm just going to run this to make sure it works all good. And there we go. We've got my HTML report with those 2 events along my commute. So now the next thing is to create an automation. I'm going to use a schedule trigger today. So I'm going to select an FME Flow schedule. And I'm going to use a cron expression. And so the expression I'm going to just quickly put in here is going to run this schedule every day at 4 p.m. or every weekday, sorry, Monday to Friday. So that's good. And now I'm going to add a workspace, and I'm going to run that workspace that we just published up. So I just got to configure this, select the workspace, and we're good to go. And now I'm going to paste in an email external action that I've already pre-configured with my SMTP credentials and details. But the important thing here is that I've got it set up to email me, and I've got the HTML report coming through as an attachment. So now that I save this automation, I'm going to name it. It's good. And now I'm going to start it. And because we don't want to sit here till 4 p.m. today, I'm going to go trigger this manually. And it should kick us off. So if I jump over to my email now, there we go. I see that the reports come through, and I open it up, and it sent me the data. Yeah, there we go. Now I just got to jump back to the slides. There we go. And now we're going to move on to some authentication in APIs. So why does API authentication matter? Well, the API security controls who and what are accessing the API's resources, data, and functionality. Authentication verifies your identity before you can make the API request, and authorization verifies that you have access or are allowed to make that request. You can think of this as an example like a bank. So we all have a bank card, and we can go access the bank like authentication. But just because we can access the bank doesn't mean we can access all the information at the bank. We can't access everyone else's information. We can only access our own. So that's what authorization basically does. Luckily, FME supports a lot of types of authentication. We've got some HTTP protocol authentication methods, unique identifiers, as well as OAuth. I'm gonna walk through a few of these today. We have basic and digest authentication with putting in our credentials. The difference is digest uses encrypted credentials and basic sends them over plain text. You can see here I've configured the HTTP caller to use some basic credentials with my own. We also have unique identifier keys like API keys, where we go into the API itself and generate this key that is used to authenticate and give us access to the appropriate resources. We've also got OAuth, which is a secure method to obtain and identify yourself using a token. If you've ever skipped inputting credentials directly into a website and instead use your Google account to log in, you've used OAuth. And it's very easily used with our web connections, which I'm going to go through in a bit more detail. but basically they're a great way to store and house all these different authentication methods. Okay, so our web connections that we have provide a safe and convenient way to store, share, and reuse connection parameters throughout workflows on FME Form and FME Flow. Their credentials are stored in a secure name container and can be reused consistently to connect to the different web services. And they're compatible with all our supported authentication methods, but they're especially useful for OAuth 2. FME is shipped with templates for web services that use OAuth, where you just need to log in. But if we don't have one that comes with FME out of the box, you can also create your own custom OAuth 2 web service and connection by following that link. We'll walk you through how. So, as we saw earlier, the HTTP caller is mainly used to make our API requests. And using authentication to access the API is super easy in our HTTP caller. First, you got to select Use Authentication. Then you have to choose the authentication type, enter your credentials, and away you go. You're good to go. I've set up basic here, just with my credentials, but Tandra is going to show us how to use a web connection in the HTTP caller later. Okay, so you might be wondering, so I have an API, and how do I know what authentication type do I need to use with this API? Well, the best thing to do is always check the API documentation. Here we see a screen capture of Google's API, and you can tell right away that it uses OAuth. So you'll want to create a web connection in FME to connect to it. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into a demo that's going to showcase a workflow that pulls data from the Movebank API on bald eagle migratory patterns and stream it back to a web map. The challenge here that we encounter is how to connect to the Movebank API with authentication and then formatting the data and streaming it back to ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to show you how to connect to the API with the HTTP caller again, and how we transform the data and parse the response. And the result here is that we're going to have a workspace that will connect to the database on demand and then stream the data live back to our ArcGIS Online map. Okay, so let's jump into the demo. Okay, so here's our Movebank API. I want bald eagles in the Pacific Northwest today. So I'm just going to search it, and I believe it's this one. So I'm going to just open this, and the important thing from this page is this Movebank ID, and I'm going to use that in my request to reference this specific study. Now, how do I make that request? Well, we're going to go to Tools and APIs to have a look at our documentation. The documentation's right here. There we go. And so I want to access CSV. So I'm going to click here, the CSV with the data. And the key here is I need to provide valid credentials, and that seems the most important part here. So I'm going to jump back, and I'm going to go have a look because I want specific event data for an individual animal. And here's a URL that we need. And it also gives us an example of what this output CSV is going to look like. So now if I jump over to Workbench, I've already got one created. We've got our creator and HTTP caller to make the API request. I'm going to read in the CSV. And then I'm going to format the data a little bit and write it out to ArcGIS Online. So let's start by looking in the HTTP caller. I've got my request URL and the get method, and I've also got these query parameters. So I've got the study ID that I pointed out, and I've also got the individual animal ID set up as a user parameter. So I can select different ones. We can see our preview, and I'm also going to save the response out to a file instead of a JSON, instead of parsing the JSON. And yeah. So here, let's run it. I'm going to select a different bird ID, and it's failed. So let me go have a look. And we've got a 401. So the HTTP 401 error is usually that we don't meet the authentication requirements. So I'm going to jump back into here and add my information. We've got all these different types, but I'm going to use basic today. So I'm just going to type in my credentials that I'd use to log into the Movebank API. I should be good to go now. So let me run it. Then there we go. Looks successful. So if we have a look, there we go. We've got our file path that I'm going to use in this feature reader to read in the data. And there we go. And if I have a look at this output port, though, I have no schema. So I need to expose the attributes again. So those are the ones I'm going to expose. And there we go. Now we've got all our data down there. So we're good to go. So I'm going to use the vertex creator to add a point using that latitude and longitude data. And then I'm going to alter the timestamp to just use month and day. And I'm also then going to use that timestamp to categorize into seasons. So if we run that, there we go. Now we can see that our timestamp's been altered and the season's been added to our data. So that all looks good. Let's just check the map to make sure. Open this up. Here we can see our points through BC and northern Alberta and up into the Northwest Territories. So that's great. Since that all looks good, I'm going to write it out to ArcGIS Online now. And while I do that, I'm going to point out that I've already created an OAuth web connection to connect to our ArcGIS Online that I'm using to do this. And let's jump over to ArcGIS Online to see. So this is our map. I'm just going to refresh it. And there we go. We've got our new data added. So we can see the points from this bald eagle that I've selected throughout BC and Alberta. We can see the different seasons based on the color that they are. And yeah, looks good, hey? Awesome. So now I'm going to pass it back to Evie.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so thanks for that great demo, Bailey. I'm going to jump into a new transformer we have available in 2024.1 called the Open API caller. So what is the Open API caller and what it's different about it is that it allows you to access an API endpoint by importing the Open API spec directly from your service. So it takes the specification through a JSON or YAML file, and the benefit is that it can auto-populate the full request URL, the authentication method, query string parameters, and headers. It can also parse the JSON response for you without the extra transformers. So that's really cool too. So I'll show you all of that in this demo. So the goal of this demo is to configure and access any API endpoint through FME through importing that spec. The block is that documentation for endpoints and APIs configuration can be confusing. Like, where is all of your different query, what do you need to query? Where's the attributes? What type of authentication method do you need to use? It's all very confusing. So the key here is this new transformer, the Open API caller, to connect to the API and parse the response. And the result is a workspace that can connect to your endpoint selected with simple configuration. So with that, I'll go into the demo. So here we're starting with a blank workspace, and I will add a creator to initiate and the Open API caller to get started. And I'll connect those up. In the Open API caller here, you can select your specification. I already have it downloaded into a JSON file, and we're going to connect to the NOAA service. And here I want to go to grid points, get, and it tells you here all the variables. I know what my variables are, so I'm going to type those in, the coordinates, but it gives you that definition. It already pre-configured everything for me. There's no authentication needed for this service. And the path variables is another way of doing the query string in this case. And then we can also fragment the JSON directly in this transformer. So I'm going to drill down into the JSON by typing in a JSON query. And I want specifically only the temperature from this call. So I'm going to go into properties, apparent temperature. I'm going to select the first value. So that's value 0 and in the temperature. So after I'm done typing this out, we'll see how this goes. But yeah, there's also in the HTTP caller, you can also import the spec into it. So that's another addition in 24.1 as well. So if I run this, you can see that the response body is exactly what I wanted. It's already parsed. It's 13 degrees right now. It's in the morning. And I'm going to set this to an emailer so that I can email my response to myself, configure it for Gmail, use my web connection already set, type in the from and to, and then I'll configure the subject and body to send off. So yeah, so I'll just name this temperature. Yeah, and what is the temperature today? Today's temperature is, and then I'll use the response body attribute to automatically fill that out, and it's in Celsius, so I'll put that there. And then click OK. And OK, and I'll run this. Make sure it went through. There we go. And then I'll go here, look, it's already sent today's temperature. So that's great. So you can configure this to publish this to Flow afterwards if you need to, or configure this anywhere else. So back to the slides here, I'll pass this off to Tandra.
Thanks for showing that off, Evie. That's really cool. I can't wait to play more with that. So next, I want to talk about FME Flow's REST API. This allows users to interact with FME Flow programmatically without using the web interface. You can perform actions such as cancel queued and running jobs, download log files, create and update schedules, and submit jobs. You can even connect to the API from Workbench to gather job statistics and create job monitoring graphs. Our documentation allows users to test out the REST API calls right in the web interface, so you can see in real time what the parameters, request URL, headers, and response body look like, as Evie and Bailey stated earlier. I'll be showing a quick demonstration of this in a bit. Monitoring job statistics on your FME Flow can be very useful if you have a busy server or are concerned about CPU usage if you have Flow hosted. Job statistics can be gathered in Workbench using the FME REST API to create HTML graphs showing current statistics such as total runs, average CPU time and percent, and average peak memory usage. You can also monitor activity on dynamic engines and manage schedules and queue control. So to gather job statistics with the FME Flow REST API, our goal is to be able to display this information in a readable way. But our unknowns are, how do we connect to the FME Flow REST API and authenticate? The key here will be to use the HTTP caller transformer again to connect to the API. We'll use transformers to parse and display the information. Our result will be that we will have a workspace that can connect to the REST API and show a customized HTML report to show various job statistics. Okay, on to the demo. For the next demonstration, I want to show you how to try out FME Flow's REST API from the web interface, and then I will demonstrate the workspace that calls the FME Flow REST API to create the job statistics reports. From the Flow homepage, navigate to the REST API and click on the API heading. You can expand each of the headings to read about how each call is made and what parameters are required. I'm going to show you how to test out an API call to find the completed jobs from a specific repository on my FME Flow. The call we want to make is under transformations. We want to get the completed jobs. Got that completed state. We're going to set some parameters. I only want to see the completed jobs and from one sample repository. Here we can see what the various response messages and HTTP status codes are. Clicking try it out will prompt me to log in to get a temporary access token. Now we can see the request URL with the parameters that we selected, completed state success and repository samples. And we can see the response body that contains the successfully completed jobs from the samples repository and the response headers. This is a quick way to test out simple calls and perform actions on your FME Flow if the web UI becomes unresponsive. The next demonstration, the modification of a tutorial we have on our website. This workspace is available for you to download and modify for your own use, and the link to the tutorial will be provided in the webinar slides. There are a few transformers I won't go into too much detail about, as they are more for organizing the JSON response and formatting the data. Plus, they're already provided in the workspace. Now, let's take a look at creating some job statistics reports. At the end of this demonstration, I will have a nice HTML graph showing which users have used the most CPU time over the past week. In order to access the FME Flow REST API, we will need to use an HTTP caller transformer in our canvas, just like in previous demos. For the request URL, we're going to use the same completed jobs call that I showed previously. The request URL is set with a variable name, so we could run this on any FME Flow. You could use your own URL directly, but using a variable allows for more flexibility. Now we'll take a look at the authentication. In the previous demonstration, I was able to use a temporary API token in order to access the completed jobs. But that expires after an hour, and I want something more permanent. So I'm going to use a web connection with my credentials. This is a standard web connection to FME Flow that can be set up through the Tools menu bar that Bailey showed briefly earlier. Now we're going to set the web connection as the user parameter auth-named connection, which I can select at runtime. Again, you could use your own server directly, but this is handy if you have more than one instance of FME Flow and want the flexibility of choosing which server at runtime. I'm going to save the response body to an attribute so that we can call that with our JSON fragmenters and JSON extractors. The JSON extractor is going to read the response body, and we're going to query for the total number of jobs run, as we see here. So let's run the first bookmark and make sure we're able to connect to our FME Flow and get the list of jobs. We're also going to check out the response body once we have that. So we can see that we've successfully connected. We'll click the three dots. It looks a little messy. If we want to see it look nicer, we can click the ABC XYZ button and select JSON formatting. It's a little bit more readable for humans. And so now we can find at the bottom our total number of jobs Run is 262. This next bookmark is set up to retrieve jobs if there are multiple pages of records. This is useful if you have a really busy server with more than 1,000 entries on it. Since our total number of jobs is less than 1,000, our workflow today will skip the next few transformers. The final bookmark in this step is to get those remaining jobs and expose the attributes we want. We're particularly interested in CPU percent, CPU time, memory usage, and users. This can be customized to provide more or less information depending on the needs of your report. Now we're going to see the statistics calculator. This is where we can calculate the average values of the CPU time. And for the ease of this demonstration, I'm only going to be showing the CPU time in my graph, but you can have multiple bits of information. Finally, we'll check out the customized HTML report generator. We can customize the title, what colors we want to see, and type of chart. I'm going to use a bar chart for this so I can easily compare CPU time across users. Now we can run the entire workflow and we will set the parameters that we want to use. I select my web connection, which I've already authorized. Number of days back we want to look. We'll select 7 for that. And the number of workflows, which we'll use is 10. That was successful. Now we can open up our graph that we've made. And we can see that Sarah has used a lot of CPU time over the last week, followed by me and Matt. And so that concludes that demonstration. And that also concludes all of the demonstrations in this webinar. We hope you enjoyed seeing how leveraging APIs can make your workflows more agile and automated. In summary here, we have discussed how to connect to any API using the HTTP caller transformer, including FME's own REST API. We've shown you how with the Open API transformer, you can import API specifications and parse the response body all within one transformer. And we've shown you how FME's REST API can be used to create useful job statistics report to monitor your online usage. We hope you enjoyed learning about this functionality, and I will pass this back to, I think, Elizabeth now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tandra. Okay, so I'll just take us through some summary resources. But first, if you are new to SAFE, we'd love to give you a brief introduction to some stats about us. So we've been in the data integration business for over 30 years now. I just celebrated our 30 years about a year ago, probably now. We support over 25,000 organizations around the world, and we have maybe even closer to 30,000 community members at this point. Some resources to help you get started after the webinar. So we have some specific resources. Getting started with REST APIs, the team has told me, and feel free to chime in, team. But this is a great place to get started. It has some other additional resources linked, and yeah, it's a great foundational place. Great knowledge article there.
Yeah, I just posted the main ones to the chat.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, and if you ever want to reference these after the webinar, of course, we'll send out the slide deck where you can download it right now as well. We're all about free resources here at SAFE. So if you have yet to get our ebook, there is the hyperlink there, free of charge spatial data for the enterprise. Our FME Academy and Knowledge Base are also great places to get guided learning at your fingertips. Our FME Academy in particular, I will highlight, we offer free instructor-led training through the Academy. And as well our webinar program. So check out upcoming and on-demand webinars via that link there as well. We have lots of great ones just posted and many more on the horizon here. If you're interested in more audio-based learning as well, we do have a few awesome podcasts through EM360. So we encourage you to take a look at those, maybe download some for your commute to work. And the peak of data integration, the call for presentations, is currently open until the end of November. All levels of proficiency are welcome for that call, and there's a couple different submission options for timing. And then I'll also highlight that registration opens on September 17th. So that's coming up quite quickly here. In terms of next steps, we would love to get in touch with you to help you get started with anything data, info@safe.com. And I will also send a link out here if you wish to email us directly. That will help. And then our FME Accelerator course as well is a great place to get started with FME. It's 90 minutes free of charge. The community badge code, I will drop that in the chat. And then once you get it, just head on over to community.safe.com and you'll be able to enter it on the right-hand side of the page. If you aren't a member of our FME community, we definitely encourage you to check it out. It's a great place to both network with other users alike and get any advice from experts. All right, with that, I will ask our presenters to join me on the stage and we can take a look through the questions together. Got some time remaining here for Q&A. Thanks, Sanai, for getting to those in the questions panel as well. It looks like we got all answered, but I'm sure there might be some we want to elaborate on live here.
Yeah, I just want to, thanks. I just want to highlight too that one of the questions was about pagination, and we didn't cover that in this webinar, but we do have great resources already available, so you should check those out. I posted them to the chat. Yeah, but thanks for all the great questions. Does anyone want to go over some of the questions already answered? Oh, yeah. Here, I'll answer this one. We can connect to SOAP. So the question is maybe mention SOAP request next. That's a great idea for our next webinar, I think. But yeah, we didn't cover that as well in this webinar, but I feel like that would be a good one to show off. It doesn't always have to be a REST API. It can be SOAP as well.
And I'll answer Lindsay's question. Does there need to be an instance running in FME Flow to run the last workflow? Yes, you do need to be able to connect to an instance of FME Flow and have the user permissions to be able to get the job statistics and completed jobs.
Yeah, I'll also answer this one from Chris. There's an idea on the FME community to see if they can implement a built-in response body formatted into the HTTP caller. I think that is in the works, considering that they've already implemented this into the Open API caller. I think it would look similar to the Open API caller when they do implement something like that. So look out for that in the future. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll just note as well while we're picking out the next question that if you do have any questions that come up after the webinar, of course, feel free to reach out to us and we'll also stay online a few minutes after we've wrapped up today in case you want to drop any more in.
I'll answer the question from Samir. Can job statistics help in determining engine amount needed for license costing? So number of engines needed. Yeah, you can monitor the CPU usage and best determine how many engines you need for your purposes. So it can be helpful for that. It can also help show you where maybe some performance improvements can be made as well.
And to add on to that, like the number of jobs running at the same time for your standard engines, in addition to the CPU usage engines as well.
One is here about requests formatted in the request body of the HTTP caller, but they want to easily change out the parameters. I would suggest in your response body, in your request body, to add in attribute values directly into it so that you can easily change this. You can even add user parameters in them as well, and then you can change them at runtime.
Yeah, like in my Movebank API demo, I used a user parameter to easily change out the different animal ID. So that's a great example of that, I think.
Yeah, and it wasn't directly shown in mine, but I had the user parameter to select which of my FME Flow instances that I was going to connect to at runtime.
Awesome. Any others that we can pull this one on the screen. We can answer this. Samir's wondering if the demo workflows will be available. And yeah, we'll post those alongside the webinar when we share it out today via email.
Yes, and the recording will also be shared with you as well. So you can watch this back as many times as you want.
Yes. Lindsay would like to know, how many years of experience do you each have? Great work, she said.
Thanks. I've been here for over 2 years at SAFE, but I studied GIS before this and have been in the field for quite a long time. If anyone else wants to answer.
I've been at SAFE for over a year now, coming up on a year and a half, I think. And yeah, same like Evie, prior to this, I studied GIS in school, and I also worked in local government using FME.
Yeah, and I've been at SAFE for less than a year, I think about 9 months now. Like Evie and Bailey, I also have a bit of a background in geography and GIS. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, very grateful for our experts leading our webinar program here. Okay, any other questions we might be wanting to get to before we wrap up? Looks like there might be a couple others.
Is there an automated way around CAPTCHA? Great question. So if the authentication method is OAuth, it probably won't require this, although there are automated ways to go through it. They usually don't require it if you go through the API. So access it through the API is the answer.
Okay, just final call out to the team in case there's any others we might be missing here that we're able to address live.
Yeah, there is one more. I don't know if our flow experts want to answer this. What about an asynchronous use of an HTTP caller with flow? I think they mean like automating it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I know you can submit jobs asynchronously with the API. So we do have that ability. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question or not, or if there's more to it, but you can submit asynchronously.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have.
All right, awesome. So I'll wrap us up here. Huge thank you to our presenters here today for all your time in creating the content, and Sinai joining us for Q&A support. And big thanks to you all in our audience today for taking the time to join us today. We hope you gained a lot of insight from this webinar. If you do have a brief moment to fill out our survey, we appreciate any feedback. Yeah, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks.